Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm back to you with another video, and I have a very special friend on today. I have my brother Josh Easley on, and today we sort of have an agenda, but it's just going to be another authentic, real conversation. So, what I want to do is I'm going to just give you a little bit of background on how I met this brother, and then we'll go ahead and jump in from there. I was teaching in Texas at the time. I was a special education teacher at a middle school in Texas. And I remember I was just serving over the summer break. We had to do like help out in the office. And I'll never forget the first day he came in, and I just happened to be at the office because I wasn't an office aide. And he was there for an interview, and I was just excited, honestly, for me, just to see another Black man in education, especially where we were at in that part of Texas. I was extremely excited. And then I found out he was kind of in the same field that I was so far as special education. So that was just like the very moment we connected, from day one. And, years later, we're still here and still connecting. So I just want to welcome Josh Easley. And if you can just give us a little bit of background of where you at, a little bit about what you're doing. And
Yeah. So I live in Washington State in the Seattle metro area. As Lamar already stated, I met him in Texas. Prior to my move up here, I lived in Dallas for 7 years. I'm originally from California. I moved out to Texas for college, and I started at a community college in Dallas, and then transitioned to the University of North Texas, where I ended up pursuing an education degree. Started teaching in 2016 when I moved up to Washington State, and yeah, I've been in the field ever since. Now I've transitioned into more of a specialist role under the special education umbrella. So now I'm working with students that have visual impairments, blind or visually impaired. And I've been doing that for a little over a year now. And I'm actually back in school at Portland State, and I'm just pursuing, a teaching endorsement. So I should be finished. Yeah, I should be finished. And, it was kind of a challenge to go back to school after being out of school since 2016, so that was 6 years. So it's changed a lot. It presented some challenges. There were online classes, back in 2016 or 2014 when I started the program, but just how courses are structured now are so different. There's so much more technology embedded throughout the coursework, which is nice, if you're working full time and trying to attend school. It gives you some flexibility, But yeah, that's just kind of a little bit about me, my career up until now. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I kind of want to just ask you, because I've always been intrigued about your personal background and then you being in education. So I guess I'll just kind of jump right into it. What do you, first of all, I guess, why is education so important to you? Like, is it something in your family, or is it a personal passion? And then I guess, so far as you teaching as well, what's the impact that you have because you're educated as well? Because I guess I'm always intrigued about males in education and then Black males in education. So if you could just give us a little bit of background of how you started, and then the importance, I guess, of males in education or the lack thereof, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how I kind of began this journey, my mom, very influential in my life, up until about the age of 7. She was a single mom. And then at the age of 7, she ended up remarrying to my stepdad.
Okay.
And prior to that, she had 3 boys, and, she was able to take care of us, because she got a degree,
Right.
And she's a mammographer, and she's been able to do so much financially for us, because she got a degree and got a good job. She,
Okay.
she works in the medical field, And so she just kind of always instilled in all of us like the importance of education, and not just in the classroom. Education doesn't begin and end in the classroom. So and age, doesn't always bring wisdom. She would always say that as well.
Yeah.
Still does.
Right. Right.
um, but she just really stressed the importance of getting some type of skill
Mhm.
that'll allow you to become self-sufficient. So in her case, uh, she's from Chicago originally, and she went to Malcolm X College, which was a community college, and she got an associate's degree in radiology.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so an X-ray tech is what she started off doing, and then she moved into mammograms. But she's done that her whole life, you know. Um, but yeah, as far as me, I always wanted to be self-sufficient. I knew as soon as I graduated high school, I was leaving California, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I wanted to explore, see what else was out there. And, and that's exactly what I did. So um, I graduated in 2009, and I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do, but I know I wanted to leave.
Right.
I knew I wanted to leave. And so uh and you know without my mom, supporting me, uh I probably I'd be where I'm at today. I'm confident in that. But my path probably would have looked a lot different.
Okay.
And so anyway, I moved to Dallas. I went to El Centro Community College, and while I was there, I was pursuing an associate's degree in the healthcare field because that's what my mom does. Like I previously stated, and I saw how far she was able to get working in the healthcare field. But I started taking some of those classes, and I quickly found out like, nah, this ain't for me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so um, when I started kind of rethinking things, the first thing I did was I reached out to different professionals and I started job shadowing.
Okay.
So yeah, initially I thought I wanted to either go into business and work for city or state government, like as a business analyst or something, or a financial analyst. Um, and then plan B was uh, I had job shadowed a few occupational therapists um, at an assistance living center, and I liked what they did on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And I felt like it was a good way to help others and kind of give back to, um, you know, my community or the community.
Mhm.
And so um, from there, I transitioned to UNT, which was a very smooth transition. And I ended up majoring in rehabilitation studies. And so my practicum before I graduated with my bachelor's was at a community um, a community center for people with disabilities, and it was in
Okay.
Plano. And so um, my supervisor there at the time, my practicum supervisor, she asked me if I had ever thought about education. She thought that being a teacher would kind of fit my personality
Right.
and my demeanor. And so I was like, no, I don't want to be a teacher.
Yeah.
But I was at this crossroads between, okay, do I want to apply to occupational therapy programs, which are few and far between. There's one in Denton, and then there was another one at the University of Texas Medical Branch, which is in Galveston. And
Mhm.
I was living in Dallas, and I really liked live in, in Dallas. And so I was like, I'd really rather stay put. Um, and so at that time, I received an email. I remember uh, the administrative assistant's name, Jeannie McMahon. I received an email and it was just like, hey, the SPED program director, Dr. Bullock, he's retired since then, but he was the program director at the time. He would like to talk to you about a grant that he has.
Right.
And he's looking for people with your educational background. So at that time, I was like, okay, well, grant, when I saw the words grant, I thought free
Yeah.
money. So I was like, all right, I'll hear him out, see what he has to say. So um, at that time, scheduled an appointment with her to meet with them, and I just got a really good feeling from him,
Yeah.
about this program, and it was fully funded, a master's degree. In return, I had to uh, work at an alternative behavior school in Garland, and so um, behavior wasn't something that I was interested in, to be
Yeah.
honest,
Right.
uh, because I didn't think it was sustainable. And so I was like, well, this program is going to pay for my degree, and it will, you know, also help me get some teaching experience,
Right.
you know, um, which will make me more marketable when I start looking for work. And so, yeah, I ended up getting accepted to the program. Um, and another push really was, I know that growing up, there wasn't a lot of Black males in
Yeah.
education.
Yeah.
Um, Thinking back, I had one, Mr. Spencer, when I got to high school, and he was a business and computer applications teacher.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was the only one. And then even when I was at UNT, there were quite a few people of color, but they were primarily women.
Right.
Um, I didn't see any Black men really, and even in my program, I was the only Black man.
Yeah.
And so, um, you know, I also wanted to pursue education for that reason. And I was like, there's so many different avenues I can go down upon graduating with this degree. Even if I teach for a couple of years,
Right.
I can move into administration, which I soon found out I didn't want to be an administrator. But I felt like I had options, with this degree.
Yeah. I'm
So.
glad you mentioned that. Like that was a question I was going to ask, but now that you brought it up, it's like for me as well, I've noticed I can think back and probably count on one hand the amount of Black males I've seen in education from me growing up. I mean, predominantly in education, they're women, and then they're not usually women of color. Some are, but I always thought that was a kind of a disservice, even when I was in school. So, kind of my background, I got into
Mhm.
education through subbing. My kids will go to a
Mm,
private Christian school and I work third shift as a security officer. But every day I drop them off, I just love on the kids. I kind of volunteer, and I was up there so much that the teacher put an application in my backpack, and I'm like, "What is this?" And it was an application to be a substitute teacher. So I'm like,
mm,
"Oh, okay." So I start subbing, and if you find out real quickly whether you love teaching or not once you step in that classroom. And I remember walking in there and the kids were so excited. I mean, I'll start subbing kindergarten first, and the kids were
mm,
so cute. They were loving, and I just was sharing with them and loving on them. Just being a substitute teacher, you didn't have many plans, but just the fact that I was an authority figure and them kids enjoyed being with me and I was with my kids. So
mm,
moved to Texas, same thing. I'm at the school a
mm.
lot because I always wanted to be involved in my kids' education. I didn't want to be
Yeah.
that parent who dropped my kids off and let the teachers do whatever. I know that it takes a village. And the
Hmm.
same thing happened when I went to the middle school in Texas. They were like, hey, you're here all the time. Do you want to sub? So
Yeah.
again, I find myself subbing, but lo and behold, I end up subbing in this SBS classroom. And I've
Mm,
never dealt with behavior kids. I've never dealt with special needs. But
mm,
being a black male was an advantage because the first kid I ran into was in a self-contained room.
mhm.
And I just start talking to him. He's a young black kid. I'm getting his story. We're playing Uno, and I make that connection because I look like him. He looks like me. So automatically we connect. And
Mhm.
then through that connection, I'm able to talk to him about sports. He wanted to be a rapper. He wanted to buy his mom a car, Louis Vuitton. I connected with him. I understood. He wanted to have
Yeah.
gold fronts. And just because of the culture, I'm like, okay, I get it. This is the path you want to go. And from there, making that connection, I'm able to now get him out of that self-contained room. He's
Yeah.
connected with me on another level. Then I'm able to get him to be involved in education because I
Yeah.
listened to his story. I listened to him not having a dad growing up and being involved with his mom and moving and just
Mm,
fighting,
mm,
and I didn't look at him as a statistic. I didn't look at him as a young black kid. I kind of
mhm,
saw myself. I'm like, man, I come
mhm,
from Columbus, Ohio. I know what the struggle is.
mhm.
So for me, it wasn't foreign. It was something I understood, and in understanding that, I was able to kind of help them. So I'm not saying that's a story for everybody, but when you're a person of color and when you're a male, it's easy
Mhm.
for those kids to connect with you because you look like them,
Yep.
and I don't know. I was just talking to my wife the other day, and I think what happens is she mentioned something that was profound to me. She said, a lot of times it's hard for us to teach as teachers because the kids need to be parented. And it blew me away because as teachers, we become everything. We're not just in the
Yeah.
classroom talking about X's and O's and language arts. We're
Yep.
parenting, we're counseling, we're therapists,
Yep.
we're behavioral, whatever it takes. So we're dealing with all
Wear
of that.
many hats. Yeah.
Yeah, we wear many
Mhm.
hats. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that, like the impact of being a male. I remember going to a school and the young boys cheered. Again, I'm subbing and
Yeah.
I'm like, why are you guys screaming like I'm a rock star? One of the
Yeah.
boys was, we have a man teacher. And
Yeah.
at that moment, I knew that it was bigger than me. And
Mhm.
I remember just going out on recess and I'm kicking the ball with them and I'm throwing the football and playing basketball. And one of the teachers came up to me. She's like, Mr. Thompson, you don't have to do this. This is your lunch break. But I'm like, you don't understand the,
Mhm.
the fact that they made me feel special because I was a man teacher, and I'm not going to take this away because that was big. And that's
Mhm.
when I really began to just fell in love with education. I kind of
Mhm.
got into it by accident, but because I was around it, it was like I saw the need and I couldn't turn away from it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna just put my headphones on.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
No, but can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, yeah. No, but I couldn't agree more. Our presence is so it's our presence is valued
Yeah.
so much, and sometimes if it's not valued by administrators and building staff, it's definitely valued by the students.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
you just kind of just spoke to that. Um, yeah, I think the only thing that I've kind of encountered, and I think this is more of a regional thing, um, is sometimes we're the only one in the building that looks like us,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And so, when I started in Texas, it was refreshing because I often seen other Black males, you
Yeah.
know. But when I started teaching out on the West Coast, we're kind of few and far between.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, it's just me.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, you know, you don't always have someone you feel comfortable just having an organic conversation with, you know?
Yeah.
that you can go into their classroom and really just speak freely about
Uh,
things, you know.
yeah.
Um, and to kind of add another layer to that, and this is something that I hadn't experienced prior to 2020, and I know that was just it was a lot for all of us, but you know, after George Floyd, passed
Mhm.
away, I had some of my colleagues actually come into my classroom and
Wow.
apologize to me. Yeah. And tell me that they're an ally, you know,
Yeah.
which I understood where they were coming from.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
It's
coming
like
from
mixed emotions. Yeah. Like,
exactly. It was coming from a place of, I feel, sincerity, um, and them really trying to, sympathize with me.
mm,
Um, but like I said, it didn't really make me feel good
yeah.
or comforted. If anything, it made me um, feel like I didn't really have anybody I could go and talk to,
Right.
because my immediate reaction was like, mm, okay. And I just had to hold that in until I got home and I could tell my wife about it, because I could
Yeah. Who can
I
you go to
couldn't
talk
hop in
to
and
about that?
into
Yeah.
anybody else's classroom and say, okay. And like I said, there was no malicious intent or anything like that. It was, I feel like, really coming from a place of sincerity. But
Yeah.
yeah, it just
Let me
kind of made
ask
me
you
uncomfortable.
a quick question. You may have the answer, you may not. We're just kind of shooting the breeze right now. Why do you think why do you think there's not a lot of minority males in education? Or, I mean, I know it's not particularly black males, but I mean, why do you think that we're not in education? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying we're not, because there's obviously black teachers, there's teachers of minority in different places. But when it
Hmm.
comes to males, or predominantly young black males, why is it there's a lack of us,
Hmm.
teaching?
Hmm. I think part of it is because it's always been seen, not always. So let me, yeah, it hasn't always been seen this way, but as of late, it's usually seen as a uh, predominantly white female field, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, not to dive too deep into that, but working in education kind of carries this stigma, um, that we're all underpaid.
Hmm.
We're all underpaid. Um, we have to work with the bare minimum.
Right.
Um, so we don't have access to the resources that we need to do our job well.
Right.
Um, we don't always have full support from our administrators and district staff. Um, but kind of getting back to the root of the question, I think there isn't a huge presence of Black male educators,
Mm.
especially in the early grades, your K through 5, to where kids that look like you and I are able to see themselves, or just, students of color are able to see themselves, because especially in primary school, the
Mhm.
teachers are, white women. And so I think that that's a huge factor. Um, and oftentimes our youth, they say, well, I want to be a professional athlete,
Yeah.
or I want to be a rapper, um, or a musician or entertainer, which there isn't necessarily anything wrong with that. But I think
Mhm.
oftentimes the reason why that is something they're so vocal about in regards to um, careers and career exploration, um, is because that's what they see on TV and in the media. That's the positive representation of people who look like them. They're entertaining, um, they're athletes, you know,
Yeah.
and so there's just not a lot, a lot of us that they see in the media, um, that are scholars, you
Yeah.
know, or they're doctors,
Man,
you
you took
know.
the words
And
right
so
out of
I
my
think that's, yeah, so I think that that's a huge part. And then, you know, not all, of course, but many of us do come from inner city neighborhoods. And
yeah.
so if we're pursuing um, a degree, you know, if we are presented with that opportunity and we're pursuing a degree, um, most of us are going to pursue something that we think will give us a huge return on investment. And historically, education hasn't been one of those degrees, um, especially if you're working, you know, in the Midwest or
Yeah.
in the southern part of the U.S. So I think that's a huge factor in it as well. And I think a lot of these colleges have to do a better job of uh, reaching out to students at a younger age
Yeah.
to try and you know, let them know that a career in education is an option, and we need people like you.
Yeah.
So,
Man, that's so good. I mean, you kind of summed up what I wanted to say and talk about, and that was good. One of the, I think the major things you said was we don't think it's a huge return. And I mean, because I'm in education, I see it every day. And that's why it's amazing to talk to you because we get it. I mean, the
hmm
first kid I ever had contact with, that's what he wanted to do was be a rapper because he's like,
hmm
if I rap, I'm going to make this amount of money and help my family. Like in the
hmm
young generation, especially the young Black community, whatever job we want to make tons of money because we want to get
hmm
out of that situation we're in. If I'm growing up in
exactly.
the hood, I'm growing up poor, I'm going to be an athlete or a rapper or do something that's going to make me tons of money so
hmm
that I can help my family so we don't have to struggle. But what
hmm
I heard when you said a huge return, what I've seen, and I'm pretty sure you've seen it as well,
hmm
teaching necessarily doesn't pay you the best, but this is
hmm
one of the biggest returns we can have because
hmm
when I talk to some of my students now, they understand why Mr. Thompson was there and like why Mr. Easy was there. The other
hmm
day I had one of my students and he came to an after hours event I had and he's the
hmm
youngest one in the room around a bunch of adults. And we asked him
hmm
a question, and it's ironic. His name was not, but we asked him a question about the youth,
yeah.
and he
hmm
answered, and we were able to get a snapshot of what it looks like because
hmm
we're almost 40 and all plus in the room, and he's
hmm
telling us what this generation needs. So to have a young person from that generation understand that it was
hmm
good for us. So,
yeah.
I mean, you said that, which was good, is we automatically assume we have to be rappers or actors or entertainers, and we
hmm
don't see the impact of it. If you teach, you're
yep.
taking what you have, you're shaping another generation of children who look like you and who don't look like you. And I
Yeah.
think the beautiful thing is we change the narrative, not
Yeah.
only for the students we teach, but also for our colleagues. I mean, for me, it's never about race, it's never about color, but it is a representation when you can be around other people and they see positive Black males who have degrees and who are teaching. Because
hmm
when the kids were acting up in those schools, I was the teacher to correct them, but they also saw not all Blacks act like this, or not all
hmm
cultures act like this, and we were able to change the
hmm
narrative by being in education. So that really hit me when you said that because I see it every day. The majority of the kids I
hmm
teach, they feel like that's all they can do. Like I rarely hear
hmm
any other kid saying, I want to be a teacher or I want to be
hmm
in education. It's
hmm
entertaining, acting, rapping, whatever's going to make me the most money so I can get out of this situation. And you know
yeah.
as well as I do, the only way we can really advance is through education, is through investing in
Yeah.
ourselves. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Glad you said
Yeah.
that.
And I think we also need to kind of shift the culture um, in regards to education
Yeah.
and our outlook on education. And what I mean by that is oftentimes it's not seen as cool to be educated, you know, or to read books, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a nerd. Oh, you lame.
It's
You
like
know
we
what I
rehearsed
mean?
it. I
And
promise you. No, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I feel like we rehearsed this because the exact things I wanted to talk about, you're saying it before I can even ask you. And that's the genuineness I love
yeah,
about our relationship and about being
yeah,
males and black males is because you get the stigma just as well as I get it. So it's not like we have to
yeah,
rehearse it. I'm gonna let you finish, but I just had to say that like I'm blown away because I'm like, you saying exactly what I wanted to
yeah.
ask you. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think you know, a part of that is it might make some of our youth uncomfortable, but you
yeah,
have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, you know,
yeah,
especially
yeah.
in you know today's world and within the realm of education. But um yeah, I think that just needs to shift because I think oftentimes it's seen as uncool by you know our peers
Right.
um, to be educated, and so I don't know I don't know what necessarily has to happen. I think a good start would be just uh, giving our youth different representations of black or yeah black people, you know.
Yeah.
um and like I said, it's almost to the extent of being programmed because successful people, you know, black people that you see, they're usually entertainers, you know, and like I said earlier, um, but yeah,
I think
I
it starts with us. I mean, that's good you said that. Like the representation changes, and you see it as well as I do. When we're in a classroom, we're teaching them, first of all, just by being there, by our lifestyle. Before we even open our
mhm,
mouth, we're saying, wait a minute, I have an African American teacher. I have an African American male teacher. So
mhm,
they're not a rapper, they're not an actor, they're not a sports coach, you know, because usually we're coaches at the school, but they're in the classroom, so they have education and they're able to teach me, and that was big for me as well because sometimes we fall into it, and I'm glad you touched on that. If we don't see it, we don't know we can obtain it, because even in my childhood
mhm,
I really didn't remember seeing a lot of male black teachers, so that's not a thought. If that's something you can be, you only want to be something you can see. So we're not represented in education, or maybe we are but it's not broadcast enough. we have
mhm,
we have no thought process behind that, you know. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, man. When we talk about educated, my wife was just telling a young kid about Ben Carson, how Ben
mhm,
Carson came from the hood, you know, he had
yep,
different issues, and now he's a world renowned now surgeon, you know, ran for, you know, politics and things like that. But the kids
mhm,
today may see him and they just, you know, like we say, oh, he's a cornball, or oh, he's a nerd. He's self-sufficient, he has money, he's taking care of his family, and he came from a bad situation. You know, a lot of rappers, they talk
mhm,
about coming from the mud or getting it out the dirt or whatever they say. And it's just like,
mhm,
that's what they talk about. But what about the
mhm,
educated black man who did the same thing,
mhm,
who came from a
mhm,
bad situation, but we're in
mhm,
education, we read books, we're getting knowledge. Why is that not sought after? Why is that not cool?
mhm,
You kind of
mhm.
touched on it because of what we're seeing or what we're portrayed
Yeah,
at.
yeah. And I don't understand how we've gotten to um this point where it's kind of cool to not be smart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
that could be book smart or street smart, however you look at it. But
Right.
I think that there's definitely been a shift, and I agree with you as far as it does start with us. It's not easy, but I also think to kind of get to the masses. Media helps,
Yeah.
you know, and there's been a lot of programming going on, and I think we all together we just need to kind of free our minds,
Yeah.
you know, and the best way to do that, I think, is through um, educating yourself, you know,
Yeah. You're right about that.
so um, if I can just bring up an example.
Please.
So yesterday my wife and I, we went to the movies, and we saw this movie, uh, Chevalier. I don't know
Mhm.
if you've ever heard of it.
Uh,
No? Okay. So um, it's about a man named Joseph Bologna, and he was born um, in Guadeloupe,
mhm.
which I want to say is a territory of France. Long story short, this is someone I had never heard of.
Okay.
But let me ask you a quick question, and then I'll continue. Um, when you think of classical music, can you name one composer? Does one composer come to mind?
With classical music, I'm probably way off because my mind goes to like Mozart or Beethoven, but I don't even know if
No,
that's
no, 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 no. That's
okay.
right. That's
Right.
right.
Okay.
Okay. Now, you might not be able to uh, name a particular composition that they did, right?
Right.
By Mozart or Beethoven, but you have at least heard those names.
Yeah.
So, with this particular uh, person, musician, he was a violinist, and he was alive during that same time. Okay, but he was black.
Mm.
Okay, and so some people even have called him the Black Mozart. And I just never heard of this guy. And I find that there's just so many people throughout our history, and this is why history is so important,
Yeah.
um, that have done great things, but they have been rewritten, you know, out of history and erased, and I think that it's important to educate our youth on people who came before them
Yeah.
that weren't just athletes. And I'm not talking down to athletes and, or about athletes and entertainers, actors. The difference is we always hear about them,
Yeah. Always.
you know. Um, we don't always hear about all the other people of color that have done great things and were so integral to the fabric and make of this country, but have been erased or written out of history. And so I brought that up just to say it's extremely important. And I always say that education doesn't begin and end in the classroom.
Right.
It's always important to educate yourself. How do you prevent the same mistakes from repeating themselves over and over again? You got to educate yourself.
Yeah. Have to.
you know
I appreciate you sharing that. That was good because I mean there are a lot of people we don't hear about. And I don't know, just like talking about education too, I feel like people think when you're educated, you have to lose yourself, and
Mhm,
I remember meeting you, we instantly clicked. One, because we
mhm,
looked like each other and we
mhm,
were males and we were in education. So it was
mhm,
almost like an unwritten bond, like, okay, whatever you need, I'm going to take care of you. And we had that sense of camaraderie. We weren't competing
mhm,
or whatever. And
mhm,
we were able to, I guess, when you talked about that situation that happened at your school, we were able to relate on a different level because we were
mhm,
both education,
mhm,
we were both knowledgeable with different things. We were able to run things past each other. And then that
mhm,
led to a genuine friendship. I mean, I
mhm,
remember there were times where there was like film festivals coming and Black film
Oh,
festivals,
yeah.
and we were like, hey man, let's go to this. And it
Yeah.
was beautiful because we were able to enjoy each other. We were able to listen to music. We were able to talk about culture, but also
Hmm.
talk about education. We weren't
Hmm.
pigeonholed into talking about the same things or the same music. And we had a
Hmm.
wide range of music. Yeah, we listened
Hmm.
to some hip hop, but we listened to everything else. And we talked about why that was important to us. And that's the
Yeah.
important education too. You can broaden yourself. And
Yeah.
I remember we went to like the poetry slams, and we went to
Yep.
the film festival, and we heard other speakers talk about the state of education and the state of music and our culture. So as we were still educating ourselves, we're able to take that back to other people. And that's the important part
Hmm.
of education, is once we begin to educate ourselves more, we can begin to teach other people, but we can't teach what we don't know or what we don't learn.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's duality in everyone.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm gonna speak from my personal experience. And what I mean by duality is, you know, more or less code switching in this case.
Yep.
Uh, Within education, we're not always gonna talk, you know, how we talk when we're at home around our loved ones
Yeah.
and people that we can just be real with, you know.
Mhm.
Um, when we're at work, we often converse in ways that is, um, used by the more predominant
Mhm.
people
Yep.
we work with.
Yeah. Yep.
um, and so I think that that's also an important piece just in life, uh,
Yeah.
is that duality piece, especially in education,
Right.
because you have to be able to understand and know your audience, but also how to engage with them.
Yep.
And uh, that that also kind of addresses your interactions with your students, kind of that uh, cultural approach,
Mhm.
um, because even with us being Black males in education and us having Black students in our classes, um, they may or may not be the predominant, type of students in our class.
Right.
So what I mean by that is, I know the first couple of years that I taught, um, my class was very, very, very diverse, very
Mhm.
diverse. Um, but the last year that I taught in a gen ed position, my classroom was predominantly people who were not of color, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
and within education, um, no matter what grade level you're teaching, you have to be able to um, communicate effectively.
Right.
And like I said earlier, know your target audience and be able to um, kind of speak in a tone and manner that makes them understand,
Yeah.
but somewhat comfortable as well,
Mhm.
if
Yep.
that makes sense.
That makes sense.
So that's where for me, that duality comes into place. And I don't think it's like I'm being dishonest with myself and who I am,
Right.
because I'm still real.
Uh-huh.
If anything, it's just the language that I choose to communicate.
And it's
And it is needed. It is needed. And, I try and also teach my students that, you know, um, there's academic discourse, right?
Mhm.
So how you converse with your peers about an academic subject, right?
Right.
And then there's how you talk with your friends out on the playground.
Yeah. And I'm glad you
And
touched on it, because when I was in Texas, and then here it's different. Texas was a shock to me because it was diverse. I mean,
Mhm.
for me, for my kids going to Texas schools and me teaching at Texas schools, I've never been in a position where it was black, white, Mexican, Indian,
Mm.
Asian, all in one class. Here in
Okay.
Ohio, it was predominantly black, and then you had a
Oh,
few of the minorities, which were usually the white kids, and they were either by
got you.
themselves or mixed with the black kids. So for me to teach in an environment, first of all, it was a cultural shock because of the different cultures, and then of the
Mhm.
different religions, and then of the different, you would see, I was able to see how different cultures studied and how they interacted with each other. With some
Mhm.
cultures, even though they were already ahead of the class, they were getting A's, they
Mhm.
still went to tutoring, which I didn't
Mhm.
understand. Whereas some
Mhm.
cultures, they didn't understand the stuff and they never went to
Mhm.
tutoring, they never went to help. And I'm
Mhm.
just, I start seeing how some cultures get ahead based on what they were doing. But
Mhm.
to come to your point again, you hit it before I can even ask you that, that code switching is
Mhm.
very important. And I don't think it's something that's taught, but it's something that we need to do because, like you mentioned, the way we talk to our friends, our family at home, you necessarily can't talk like that in the workplace. And it's not you being
Mhm.
different. But
Mhm.
for an example, one of my students was saying that they work at a McDonald's and we were
Mhm.
having a real conversation, and I said, do you act the same way at school that you act at work? They said no. To them,
Mhm.
code switching was being white. From their perspective, they said,
Yep.
no, I talk white. I said,
Mhm.
what is talking white? Is there such thing as
Mhm.
talking white? They said, oh, I talk more professional. I said, well, why does talking more professional have to be labeled as talking white? Just because
Mhm.
you sound smart or educated, it has to be
Mhm.
white. And they're like, well, I
Mhm.
don't cuss as much, or I don't use this much language, or I don't do my body language like this. And I was trying
Mhm.
to explain to them, there's different times and different areas to be a different version of yourself, but it's all
Mhm.
because
Exactly.
certain times calls for different things. So, I mean, that's just another important thing I think is, like you mentioned before, we look at education, you have to be a certain way when you're in education, or you have to act
Mhm.
a certain way. And it's
Mhm.
not so. I'm just glad we're having this conversation because it's important. For
Yeah.
me, it's like learning to me is dope because I'm gonna just read a quick quote because I know you'll have
Yeah.
something to say about this, but it says, you become unstoppable when you work on things people can't take away from you. Things like your mindset, character, personality, transparency, and I added education, your entire
Mhm.
being. And to me, it's like education and being educated and being able to carry yourself in a way in every setting, that's something nobody can take away from you.
Mhm.
Because for me growing up, I was taught, or you look at being black as you have to be loud or rowdy or
Mhm.
boisterous, or being rap is hip hop, being rap
Mhm.
is being a athlete. This is black
Mhm.
culture. But there's
Mhm.
a whole other side of black culture that we don't accept or we don't look at. And we kind of touched
Mhm.
on that is being
Mhm.
educated, being able to
Mhm.
provide for your family, being able
Mhm.
to be in different rooms and exude a type of energy, and I think
Mhm.
those are some things that people can't ever take away from you, and that's why I love continually being educated by reading books
Mhm.
or like
Mhm.
you did, watching movies you never will watch before,
Mhm.
listening to music that's not something you would normally listen to. There's
Mhm.
so much out there we don't expose ourselves to because we think it's not something we should be doing.
Exactly. Yeah. And, like you just said, as far as watching a movie, listening to music, or reading a book, um, those are different avenues that you can go down to educate yourself. I think
Right.
oftentimes we just think education is synonymous with a degree. You know,
Hmm.
that's not the truth. Some of the most educated people, right, that I've had conversations with didn't go to college. So I think that oftentimes we just think that, oh, well, um, you don't have a degree, so you're not really that educated. If anything, I think sometimes what it boils down to is that piece of paper is kind of something that allows you to get your foot through the door.
Yeah. Yep.
It's kind of a barrier in some senses, in a sense, to kind of gatekeep, keep people, certain people out, you
Uh-huh.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's just kind of how I look at degrees now. Not saying that it's not important, but I think a degree shows that you can show up, right?
Hmm.
You can dedicate time, right? Um, I think it shows your potential employer that you can show up,
Uh-huh.
you could dedicate your time to something, work hard towards something. That's all a degree is. No matter what your major is, that's what it
Right.
shows potential employers, in my opinion,
Yeah.
is that you can work hard towards something.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, just kind of getting back to what you said as far as why for some of us, education is kind of seen as, um, or code switching, if you will, is kind of seen as talking white. If we can go back in the day, like if we're talking Harlem Renaissance, that era, it was cool to be an intellect, you
Right.
know, to write poetry, to be involved in the arts. And I think we have unfortunately gotten away from that. But we're not too far gone,
Yeah.
and I think that is also so important because a lot of art programs have been cut from educational programs.
Hmm.
And I think especially within um, inner city areas, it is a platform, art programs. They're a platform for artistic expression for our youth.
Right.
And sometimes the only outlets, that they really have outside of going to like the community rec center, or the Y. Um, and so, oftentimes that's a hot topic within educational policy is the underfunding of education. And I don't know, I think it's important to give students, not just Black students, but all students, all students, some type of platform where they feel comfortable
Yeah.
um, to express themselves. I think that's why we have such one of the reasons why we have such a mental health crisis right now within education. I mean, there's other factors that play into that.
Hmm.
Um, but I think a big part of it is there's too much social media.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that um, a lot of the platforms that we once had have have changed,
Yeah.
and we've kind of done away with some of them. Um, and it's not, I feel like it's not as common to promote those different platforms because oftentimes we're teaching to a test, a standardized test. Our focus is on, a specific curriculum, not
Yeah.
so much on, um, like I said, kind of that creative expression, and imagination. I think that that's one of the most powerful things that a child has is their imagination. I can be an astronaut. I can be an archaeologist, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think if we kind of allow that to happen more often and nurture it to where it, kind of just flourishes and blossoms, um, maybe we wouldn't have as many students suffering with depression because they feel like they don't have an outlet or somebody to talk to.
Yeah. I'm so
So,
glad you said that. Like, I'll be honest, we've talked many, many times, but I didn't know how much we had in common until we actually start talking about this because every time something comes up, you mention it beforehand when you talk
mhm,
about the mental illness and the imagination. I
mhm,
mean, I love that I'm in education because I get to see the next generation firsthand. And I can
mhm,
tell you, just the other day, I was talking to one of the students and I told him, I feel like a lot of you guys can't even imagine what you want to be when you grow up because you're
mhm,
just living day to day because you don't know if you're going to survive. And he's like,
mhm,
man, Mr. Thompson, you're right. A lot of these kids are worried about, am I going to be shot? Am I going to die?
mhm,
Like just 2 days ago, one of the students that I talk to every single day was murdered.
mhm,
And he was murdered by a former student, and that's what they're worried about. So a lot of times they're not dreaming about what am I going to be when I grow up or can I go to
mhm,
college? It's just, can I
mhm,
make it around a corner today? So
mhm,
they don't have that imagination of dreams. It's just, I need to make fast money. I need to do this right now. And what you said is when they cut out those programs of art and expression and when they used to have wood shop and they used to have home
mhm,
economics and even recess and things like that, the kids can't express themselves. I mean,
mhm,
I'm a special education teacher and I can't tell you how many kids have IEP or 504 plan, and it
mhm,
baffles me. Now I'm not saying they don't need it, but you
mhm,
shouldn't have a whole school who's on an IEP.
mhm,
Everybody has a mental illness now.
mhm,
Everybody has some type of supplemental learning plan to where
mhm,
nobody learns the same. And it's almost like a crutch now. Oh, you're
mhm.
hyper, you have ADHD. You don't know
Yeah.
how to focus, let's get you an IEP, and
Mhm,
we don't have any expression. Maybe instead of the IEP or the 504 plan, we bring back art, we bring
mhm,
back music, we bring back,
mhm,
physical education, those programs that
mhm,
we used to have, start
mhm,
taking kids and exposing them to something else. We
mhm.
expect them to sit in a class for 8 hours a day,
Yep,
listen to the teachers, no recess,
yep.
barely get a lunch. And when they don't do that, there's something wrong with them. So let's give them an
Mhm,
IEP. Let's put them in special education class because they learn differently. And it
mhm,
all boils down to, like you said, standardized testing. You don't
mhm,
learn well on this test, that's your problem because that's all
mhm.
we're gearing them towards the test, not towards life. So I mean, you get it. You
Preach.
said it before I can even ask you. So
Preach.
I mean, we can go on and on about this topic, but I kind of want to switch and just ask you another question because
Sure.
you said you were teaching at what was it, the school for the deaf now? Like,
Oh, yeah, I'm out of school for the visually impaired, so
okay,
blind or visually
where is
impaired.
that? I mean, because obviously you told me you've done a lot of schooling, you've had a lot of education. How did this come about, and how has this journey been for you?
Oh man. So um I started this journey in the middle of the school year, which was less than ideal because I had to leave my fifth graders. But what happened was, we were coming off of school closures because of COVID,
Mhm.
and we had transitioned back into, um, you know, the students being at school in class full time. This was the first year. This was the 2021-2022 school year.
Mhm.
And so, you had a lot of you had a lot of students at schools that were just socially inept because they had been at home for so
Right.
long. Sitting in front of a computer and the rest of the time throughout the day, probably playing video games,
Mhm.
um, or
Yep.
or doing something that we wouldn't necessarily consider productive, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so upon them returning to school, there was just a lot of unexpected behaviors. And I don't think within my particular building, they were adequately prepared um, for the students returning to school. They didn't really have a lot of systems of support in place for the students,
Yeah.
um, mentally, physically. Um, and so I think because of that, during recess and during non-structured times, um, there was just a lot of behaviors.
Yeah.
And so, excuse me, at that time, the cap was 25 students per class, right? And so I started the year with 25 students, and um, it took a while, but eventually we got to a point where our classroom culture was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Um, it did not start that way. We worked at it, I'd say. I'd
Yeah.
say by November, we started in September, early September. And by November, we had finally gotten to a point where students were respecting themselves and their peers.
Right.
Um, and so, because I have a background in behavior, um, in the past, I've had students put on my caseload that, um, were high flyers, and so this particular year, like I said, it's November now. Um, the week prior to Thanksgiving, I noticed that there was a student that was just always out in the courtyard. Okay. And at this particular school I was at, it was unique because it was only grades 4 and 5.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I always taught fifth grade. And, I would engage in conversation with the student briefly during passing periods, um, if I was going on my break, using the restroom, things of that nature. And he always came off extremely polite to me, but I knew he was out in the courtyard for a reason, right?
Right.
and so and so I come to find out by my building administrator Friday afternoon that this particular student was going to be placed in my class on Monday,
Yeah.
and that his secretary had already started the process of transferring him into my class, and it would be finalized by Monday. So I'm like, okay. So this was very short notice, right?
Yeah.
And males are few and far between in the primary grades to begin with,
Mhm.
primary and intermediate. Um, Black males are extremely rare, right? So there was one other male in the building, and he taught fourth grade. So
Mhm.
I was the only only male fifth grade teacher, and this student that was being placed into my classroom, he was in a classroom with a female teacher, and they bumped heads. So he had done quite a bit. There had been quite a few formal complaints from parents, and I
Right.
won't go into details about some of the unexpected behaviors that were exhibited, but um, he had done a lot,
Mhm.
and there was even uh, a time where the police were called on. Okay,
Mhm.
and so my
Fourth grade, right?
he was in fifth grade, yeah, and the police, imagine how traumatizing that could have been for him.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, they were called for a reason, of course, but still, I thought that there could have been other options rather than calling the police on the student. But anyway, so um, my administrator was just telling me all of these negative things. I had um, the student's teacher come up to me and apologize, saying, "I'm so sorry that they're putting him in your class," and this, that, and the third. And so um, that student um, did kind of disrupt uh, the culture,
Mhm.
in that class. And they ended up getting him a one-on-one. And what was challenging for me was, as I felt like um, it was a very abrupt change, and I wasn't supported.
Right.
And I had been at that school um, 2 years. This was my
Mhm.
third year at that school. In each of those 2 years, I didn't feel fully supported.
Right.
Um, And then also not having anyone in the building that looked like me that I could
Mm,
really go and talk to.
yeah.
Um, I was just kind of like, man. But the year prior, I had a student in my class that had a visual impairment. He had optic nerve hypoplasia and he
Mhm.
had nystagmus. And so just under development of the optic nerve, and then with nystagmus, that's involuntary movement of the eyes.
Uh-huh.
And so he had a TSVI, or a teacher of students with visual impairments, that would come and work with him on like keyboarding and then assistive technology. Excuse me. And, when she had time, I would talk to her about her job. And I liked how it was more of a one-on-one.
Yeah.
Um, Instructional time was more one-on-one or small group versus a whole class. I really like that. And I like that, um, she had the flexibility to kind of create her schedule since, she was going to several different districts.
Right.
Um, and so she, really sold that position to me. And it always stayed in my mind, right? It always stayed in my mind. And, you know, this particular year, when I had this student transferred into my class, I was strongly contemplating leaving education altogether.
Right.
And so before I did that, I reached out to this TSVI, and I asked her about her schooling, right? I was like, so, like, where'd you go to school? And how did you get this teaching endorsement? And so she gave me her former mentor's information,
Okay.
and he reached out to me, told me about another grant, and
Word.
yeah,
Right.
right. Told me about another grant, and I was just like, oh, okay, awesome. Well, um, I'll apply to this TVI O&M program at Portland State. And so I did that. Now, before I even got accepted to the program, this is right around the same time I'm contemplating leaving education altogether.
Right.
Uh, I'm just on government jobs, and I see this job for a teacher of students with visual impairments and an O&M, and an O&M is an orientation and mobility specialist. And so their role is to make sure that people who are visually impaired can travel independently, safely, and efficiently from one
Okay.
place to the next. And so I saw this position. It asked for a special education background, of
Mm.
course, an endorsement um, in visual impairments and knowledge of Braille. All I had was a special education background,
Right.
but I was so fed up with my building administrator.
That'll do it sometimes. You're just like, hey, I'm
And
going to
I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just apply for this. So I applied for it, and I get a call um, from HR at the school for the blind, and they're
Yeah.
like, "Hey, we want to interview you." I was like, "Oh, well, I don't have an endorsement in visual impairments, and I don't
Right.
know Braille." "Oh, it's okay. You have a special education background, so we would still like to interview you." I
Wow.
was like, "Okay." So um, I go through with the interview, of course, and during the interview, towards the end,
Mhm.
um, I just got a really good feeling about the interview. And they seemed like really nice people. I got some good vibes from them, but most people who want to hire you are kind of gonna exude those type of vibes,
Yeah. You just
but
want to know.
that's not how they may be behind closed doors. And
Right.
so um I ended up getting a job offer, and the offer was, okay, Josh, So we'll pay for you to go back to school. Okay. We'll pay for your tuition so that you can get these 2 endorsements,
Wow.
and we'll give you a state car to drive, right? So you don't have to drive your car and get mileage reimbursement, right?
Man. Yeah.
The only catch was it was a pay cut, right? And so I was like, you know what? This is nothing but God. I
Mm.
was like, he knows, because it had gotten to the point, Lamar, I didn't like going to work, man.
Yeah.
I was
I'm
like,
glad you said that. I'm gonna let you finish, but I want to throw this in here. Like you said, two
yeah,
things I want to touch on is one, you said you didn't feel supported at that job. It breaks my heart as teachers and as educators. You can be pouring yourself out, loving your job,
hmm,
loving the students, but because you don't feel that support, it's so many educators I know who quit and get normal jobs, and
yep,
that's the sad part as well. There's so many teachers they love what they're doing, but they quit either because there's not enough money or they don't feel supported and they're burnt out and they say, you know what, I'd rather just quit education altogether.
yeah,
Or in your case, when you're the only male or the only black male, and that's what we talk about in education. Sometimes it's not even about for the students, but for the teachers. If you
yeah,
don't have another teacher or another male or another black male or whoever you may be, somebody that you feel you can talk to and bounce things off of or feel supported, you're teaching and giving out, but you're giving out everything, and then there's nobody to pour back into you.
absolutely.
So that's
Yeah,
amazing that you were able to get ready to quit, but then there's something else that kept you back in because
yeah,
the beauty of being educated, there's always other options for us. Like you mentioned,
hmm,
because of your degrees and because of your willingness to keep learning, you
hmm.
can almost create other opportunities when you don't
You
feel like
can.
doing something else. And that's the beauty of being educated, where it's
Yeah,
not just you don't pigeon yourself into one category.
yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, if I had full support from my building administrators, I would still be there.
yeah.
Um, and I'm not going to go into details, but I really felt like the building administrator was in the position for the wrong reasons. There was a lot of nepotism within
Right.
the district, and I honestly don't believe he was a big fan of children at the end of the day.
Yeah.
There was never anything going on. Like when we were in Texas, right?
Hmm.
There was always something for the kids to look forward to. They always had something planned, like within the building, whether
Yeah.
it was a pep rally, right? Or something going on after school or a club. Like there was so much that you could get involved with, you know, which
Yeah.
I thought was awesome. Um, at this particular school, there wasn't, there was really nothing for the kids to look forward to. There were no academic incentives in place. And it had gotten to the point that particular year, um, there was no cafeteria time. So students ate breakfast in the classroom. Who was
Jeez.
impacted by that? Teachers.
Yep.
So we got to work 20 minutes after getting to work, or our contract time, excuse me, our contract time was 8:10. Okay. So 20 minutes after our contract time starts, students are rolling in. So students got there at 8:30. Where do they go to eat their breakfast? They're going to their classrooms. So
Uh-huh.
they eat breakfast in their classrooms. Okay. They have a 15-minute recess, and then they're eating lunch in their classrooms. And the only other time after that that they leave the classroom is going to specialists. So specialists would be like your art, right?
Mhm.
Your music, library time if they have that. They had done away with counseling services. They had done away with the library, actually. So they actually, because of budget cuts, had gotten rid of the librarian and hired a library tech. And students could only check out books online, and the library tech would deliver the books to the classroom. So
Yeah.
they
Like,
no longer even had access to go into the library. Okay.
and they
Counts.
really expect students to learn, just to be
Yes.
there and be successful with all
Yes.
of that going on. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so they used to have counseling services where the actual school counselor would come in, or the mental health professional, and do lessons based on emotional intelligence, right?
Right.
And they did away with that. So there were so many other things that were transpiring that I just was like, wow, this is what the students need. And no one is trying to fight for these things.
Yeah.
Like, I understand budget cuts. Believe me, I do. But there are things that I feel like should always be accessible. The
Yeah.
library being one. For so many students, the library is a safe haven. They
Yeah.
used to have where you could go during your lunch, back when the students didn't have to eat lunch in their classrooms. You could
Mhm.
go into the library, read a book, and eat your lunch,
And you
you
talk
know?
about imagination. How are kids going to have an imagination if they don't have access to books? Because they're
Yeah.
not going to local libraries when they go home, at least offer that at the school. So it's
Hmm.
so many services that happen. And that's the thing too, with us been in education, we see how everybody else makes rules and regulations that affects the teachers and the students.
Yep.
Even so far as the curriculum that we teach and how we're supposed to interact with the students, or and this, I mean, I don't want to go on and on about it, but what we're supposed to call the students and the students'
Hmm.
rights and different things like that. It's just like we're even taught what to teach and how to teach it,
Yeah.
and like you said, we're teaching towards tests instead of teaching towards what the kids want to be.
Hmm.
And even
Hmm.
when I was in school, you could at least dream. Now it's just like, if you don't pass this test, forget it even about what you want to be when you grow up.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's sad. It's sad.
And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now, and I love it.
Okay.
But I'm not working for a school district or in
Yeah.
a district. I'm working for the state. And so within this role, what I do is I go to primarily rural areas, um, but I work with students who have, visual impairments, or they're functionally blind, and work with them on different skills that would be required for them to lead, a really full and independent life. And I love it because I think it really does, um, work with my strengths, this
Yeah.
job. And I don't have to deal with the bureaucracy of, um, a school district.
Yeah.
And even though I do sometimes miss the camaraderie of, just kind of shooting the breeze with my colleagues,
Uh-huh.
because I am kind of a lone ranger, I wouldn't trade it, you know, um, the flexibility in this job, but also the growth that I get to see. And I get to really focus on teaching,
Yeah.
and I get to be creative in my lesson plans. And what I was going to say is the growth, the exponential growth that I see is amazing, and it makes it all worth it. Like, before I started this program, um, you know, I hadn't really thought twice about Braille, for an example,
Yeah.
and now I know Braille, and Nemeth code. And, you know, when looking at statistics, because such a big part of my instructional focus now is literacy, Braille
Uh-huh.
literacy, um, which really is a code that allows people who are blind or visually impaired to access visual information, right?
Right.
If you look at statistics, though, Lamar, like over 70% of the blind community, they're either unemployed or underemployed, and Braille isn't being taught, and the frustrating thing is that can kind of carry over and be generalized to how things used to be taught back in the day. So, for an example, cursive in most districts. I mean, there's some states that still require the teaching of Braille, but if you are sorry, the teaching of cursive, but if you don't, if you don't understand cursive, how are you ever going to be able to analyze a historical document?
Yeah. Or
You know
even
what I
sign.
mean? That was the primary, or even,
Yeah,
yes,
I mean, there's
yes,
so many.
that
You're
too.
right. I'm glad you touched on it. There's so many kids who I say sign your name and they print it.
Yeah.
They don't. I mean, really, and it's just like, let me get your signature. You know, you're John Hancock, and they're just printing
Yeah.
your name. You
Like
know,
what?
documents say print and then sign for a reason. Literally, they're signing it twice. So it's just
Yeah.
like we're getting away from those fundamental things. And as a teacher, that breaks our heart because the things that we used to do, even so
Yeah.
far as writing letters and learning how to write letters, everything is standardized test or it's just online, you know,
Yeah.
and text message. And it's just amazing, man. I'm proud of you because the way God was able to shift and carve your life out, it just shows the amount of education and how it's never ending. I mean, that's one thing
Mhm.
I want to kind of end on too is you can never stop learning because the more you learn, the more you're able to teach. And I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. You as well, brother. And you know, that's one of the reasons why I love going to bookstores. I love going to libraries because it kind of reminds me of how much I don't know.
Yeah,
You know, just being in a library and you're walking down the aisles and you're looking at all these shelves of books and it's just like that's knowledge. That's so much information that I just don't know, you
yeah.
know?
You're right. I mean, it's just sometimes we're so comfortable. Like you mentioned it earlier, we got to be we got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And so many
Yeah.
times we won't go to somewhere we've never been. We won't try different restaurants. We
Yeah.
won't listen to different music or go into a library and pick up a book that has nothing to do with anything we've ever taught.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
why we're in the position we're in is to just tell
Mm-hmm.
people, try something different, you know,
Yeah.
look at different cultures, have different friends like you. And I didn't have that option. So to me,
Mm-hmm.
education was my out. I couldn't go
Mm-hmm.
outside my door and see somebody who didn't look like me. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, I could have been pigeonholed to listening to the same music, watching the
Mm-hmm.
same sports, and not ever wanting to get away. But it was
Mm-hmm.
my drive for education and realizing this is what I'm good at, and I'm not going to dumb
Mm-hmm.
myself down because I actually get good grades or I actually like school.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, when other opportunities presented itself, I took them. And I
Yeah.
see for you, when you're educated, other opportunities can be created for you and you're learning more, you know?
Mhm.
So, man, I'm
And
just proud of you.
thank you, thank you. And you know, I'll kind of end on this too. And I think that it's just so important for us to try our hardest to catch those students that are falling through the cracks.
Yeah,
Because with you and I, we are different. And what sets us apart is our mindset and
mhm,
the ability to be resilient. And you know, some may argue that resiliency is can be taught, and some say that it can't. You know, either you have it or you don't. But
right.
I think that you can teach it, you know, because in life there's always going to be some type of obstacle that you have to overcome.
Yeah,
Okay. For some, it may be something that, you know, it's all left up to interpretation, but you know, it might be something massive. It might be addiction, you know, it might
yeah,
be incarceration, you know. But I think that we start with role models.
yeah,
And um, getting back to, you know, Black men in education, um, I think that it's important because of what I just said, the role model piece.
yeah,
And we need more role models. And I have heard many athletes, many entertainers say that I'm not a role model,
yeah,
you know, don't look at me like a role model because I'm not. And
yep,
so I think you have these people who are kind of put in these positions where people put them on a pedestal, um, you know, false idols, really.
yeah,
And they have people kind of kind of literally, worship them.
Mhm.
LeBron James, like people who are, there are fanatics. And I know you know this, but there are people who are fanatical fans,
Yeah.
and oftentimes it starts at it starts at a young age, and they're in third, fourth grade, and they want to be a professional athlete because they are such a big fan of a particular athlete, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think if we have more role models that are accessible, and what I
Mhm.
mean by that, within their own communities, then maybe they won't idolize um, someone that they see on TV that they likely will never meet, that isn't accessible to them.
Man, you're speaking the truth. Like I'm gonna go back and rewatch this because I'm learning so much. Because I've said the exact same thing. When I talk to the
Mhm.
kids about rappers, and it's not entertaining. I love entertainment. I love
Yeah.
sports. I love rap music, but we're talking about education. It's like
Mhm.
I tell the kids, how many of those people you listen to for 24 hours a day come back and teach you? I mean, I have fights
Yeah.
with kids to where I'm like, take your headphones off so you can hear what I'm saying. Well, music helps me understand, or music helps me learn, or music calms me down.
Mhm.
Okay, but is that same musician you're listening to 23 hours a day coming here helping you or teaching you or
Mhm.
doing anything? I'm here accessible to you every single day, fighting you, and you'd rather listen to them than
Mhm.
to me. But just to
Mhm.
get to your point, because there's
Mhm.
one more quote I wasn't even going to read until you said that. Everyone tries to skip the struggle, not knowing that that's where
Mhm.
character is built. And character is built in the struggle. And kind of like you mentioned,
Mhm.
we've all struggled, but we're accessible to the kids. And I've always believed, even before I was a teacher, because like I mentioned, I didn't go to college to be a teacher. I didn't get a teaching
Mhm.
degree. I had that slip in my
Mhm.
backpack and start subbing, and I fell in love with it.
Mhm.
Therefore,
Mhm.
my degrees allowed me to fall into teaching. But it's like I've
Mhm.
always I've always felt bad that teachers didn't get paid more because you have athletes and entertainers who are getting paid
Mm.
millions and they can live a amazing life.
Mhm.
And you have
Yeah.
people who's giving their life every day teaching the next generation who's going to be athletes and presidents and rule the world, and they're struggling. And that breaks my heart because
Mhm.
as well as I do, teachers are underpaid and people in
Mhm.
education and people who are pouring their life into other people. Yet the
Mhm.
entertainers are doing what they love and they're living their best life. And it's
Mhm.
just backwards, man. But
It
I
is. That's
appreciate
that's
you, man.
society. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
So
Um, I was just gonna say, like, I honestly had to rethink my support for some franchises.
mhm.
Um, I grew up an Oakland A's fan, and I found out, I saw it coming, but I just found out that Oakland, or the Athletics franchise, has signed an agreement to build a new ballpark in Las Vegas,
Mhm.
slated for opening in 2027. So the city of Oakland has lost three franchises, or will lose three franchises in
Yeah.
under a decade, which to
Wow.
me is sad. And so at the end of the day, it usually always boils down to money.
Yeah.
Um, and they really don't care about the fan base. And so as far as like purchasing different merchandise, for these teams or these athletes, how I look at it now, at the end of the day, they don't even know who I am.
Yeah. And I'm glad you
you
said
know?
that. Like we're trying to end. It's almost like we need a part two. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna say this last piece. Like for me growing up, I loved Michael Jordan. I mean, I was the biggest
Yeah.
I'm not saying the biggest Michael Jordan fan, but I was around it. I mean,
Yeah.
I tell people to this day, my gods before Jesus Christ was Tupac and Jordan. I will argue every day, like Tupac's the greatest rapper, Jordan's the greatest basketball player. And
Yeah.
to me, going to school with the latest Jordans was who I was. If I didn't have the
Mhm.
latest Jordans, it was my identity. And
Yeah.
now I still see kids who never seen Michael Jordan play, don't really know who he is, have to have the latest Jordans. And it's something like
Mhm.
this man is still making money. I'm not
Mhm.
knocking Michael Jordan, but I'm saying in our culture, we'd rather have the latest Michael Jordans than be
Mhm.
educating ourselves. We'll spend
Mhm.
money on fashion, like you said, make other people rich who won't do anything for us, than to
Mhm.
invest in people who's trying to help build us. And that's
Mhm.
a whole nother topic we can get on. But when
Mhm.
you educate yourself, like you said, you even start paying for stuff different. You start looking
Yep.
at your purchases different. You start looking at what you're investing in differently
Yes, you
because
do.
you're educated. Education goes way beyond the classroom, and it's a
Mhm.
lifestyle because you realize you're making somebody else rich and you're still in a poverty mentality, but you look like you
Mhm.
got something. And
Mhm.
that comes down to teaching. So
Yeah. Yeah.
man, I appreciate you for being on. This is a great interview. I greatly appreciate you, man. And I just want to say, like, I wish you much success, and I'm just grateful for the time you was able to be on. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you as well, brother. I appreciate you reaching out to me and allowing me to be on your platform. And God bless.
Yes, sir. Thank you, bro. I appreciate it, man. Have a good one. I really feel like there's a part two that needs to be done because
Yeah.
it was so much information we had that I
Yeah.
really think that we can. This is an ongoing process in education and the topics we touched on. It's always more to it, you know. But
Mhm.
again, man, thank you. I definitely will be reaching out to you soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Hit me up, man.
Yes.
All right. You have a blessed one.